Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And, of course, as soon as I say I'm ready to record, now I'm fighting a cough. So we'll see how long I can hold out.
I'm Steve.
Pretty much, yeah. That's how it always goes, right?
See, I said I was ready to record, and then I, got distracted by all the buttons and stuff in our audio recording program. And for some reason, let's record the show to me meant, let's see what this button does. And I have no fucking idea what I'm doing anymore.
It's coming to you in chipmunk voice this week.
So why is the audio speeding up? And then I'll have the nerve still to bitch about God, this was such a hard editing job. It's because you didn't just record your audio, you tool.
So if you haven't listened to the show before, it's a show where we just each week talk about something interesting but random. Sometimes true things, stuff from history or whatever. Sometimes we like paranormal stories, and sometimes just flat out fiction. We'll read creepypasta.
Yeah, just whatever, catches our interest that week. It tends to veer towards, at least my half of the stories tend to veer towards either the paranormal, the spooky, or usually just the flat out depressing.
Sometimes all three.
Yeah. Usually they all kind of interweave those themes. So because this show we bring it out every Tuesday, and I just want you get past that Monday, you think okay, we took that first step on a busy week, and then I just want to drag you down.
I got this. No, I don't.
With some emotional shitty history, which I have a little bit of today. Because we're going to Salem, and I'm a little surprised that we never talked about the Salem witch trials at any point on this show yet.
It does fall exactly in our wheelhouse, yes.
Yeah. And I think the reason why is because there's just the Salem witch trials is this one big fucked up chapter in American history, but it's just made up of a ton of little stories in there, and not little in scope. They're still fucking tragedies, but it's hard to talk about any, you can't talk about the whole Salem witch trials. I feel like you really have to narrow it down to key people involved.
Yeah, otherwise you run the risk of you just overgeneralize it with people turned on each other and claimed that they were witches and killed them, and it's but there's a lot more.
Right. And so that's kind of, I found a story about one person involved. And we'll talk about him today. But I have a feeling that this won't be the only time we touch on these fucking stupid witch trials. So Giles Corey was a well-off farmer from Northampton, England. Around the time he reached his 30s, he moved himself and his first wife to America. It was a 3-month journey that would see the two settle in Salem town, where they would have their first daughter in 1658. In 1659, they moved from Salem town to Salem village to begin building their life as farmers. And if I had started Salem town and somebody showed up and made Salem village, I would be going to war.
It's just the reason I'm laughing is we've recently been looking at houses because we're thinking about moving, but anyway, the one subdivision we were looking in, there's a new section, and I noticed that one of them had this road. It goes you turn off and it dead ends into this other road, but the road it dead ends into, if you turn right, it was something like Washington Drive, and if you turn left, it was Washington Avenue. And I was just fuck this developer. What the hell?
Right. That's such a passive-aggressive fucking punk test move to be a nice town you have there. We have the village.
That's why I was laughing, because that, the road thing pissed me off, and then this is one step further than that. Now the only thing is I wish there was a Salem City that came along. Right.
I even was thinking about that as Salem City and then Salem State, and it's
the continent of Salem. Fuckers.
Yeah. And once the witch trials start, you're really glad it didn't go beyond just the town and the village. So just outside the town or village, Giles Corey's farm was immediately pretty successful. Like, you know, back then, like this, we're talking 1600s, you know, you think of farmer as one thing now, but if you were a successful farmer back then, you were kind of a key component of any region's economy.
Right.
Like, you know, because you gave them their food. So Giles Corey was doing pretty well, but his wife Margaret died soon after. He would then marry a woman named Mary Bright in 1664, and the two of them would live a simple, successful farming life for the next 2 years, except for one thing, which was that Giles Corey was said to be a violent man. And in one day in 1675, he discovered that a farmhand named Jacob Goodale had stolen apples from the storage area. Handling this like any rational businessman, he beat the farmhand to death with a stick, and then tried to tell the cops that Jacob fell and broke his arm, and that's somehow how he died.
It's not funny, but it is.
It's funny, because even like 1600s law enforcement, as we'll get to shortly, was pretty fucking far from perfect. Law enforcement isn't perfect today, but, you know, they were exactly how it sounds, centuries behind.
Right.
But even those police were like, unless this dude's arm broke completely off, became self-aware, and beat him to death with a stick, like, you're full of shit, Corey.
Right.
There's no way. So during the trial, another farmer named John Proctor testified that he had overheard Corey confess to the deed. The testimony got a successful conviction, but a farmer had more economic pull, like I said, and so Corey was seen as too important to the community to put in jail.
Of course.
Town leaders turned jail time into a fine for Goodale's death, and this created a divide among the townspeople, particularly of the more influential. Oh, hello, dog. That was really loud.
I thought you were like getting change out of like one of those little like, I don't know, change holster things, like ching 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 ching.
Nope.
That's what it sounded like. Anyway,
the new dog's allowed up here with me now, so she wants to be a part of this. Anyway, so yeah, like the influential people of Salem town and Salem village really kind of became split, and a lot of people really hated that Corey essentially bought his way out of jail for what was a clear murder. Added with the fact that before this, Corey had already been tried twice for theft, it just seemed like to them Corey was this violent person with no respect or consideration for the law.
Yeah, that makes that even, well, I don't know if it can, it's hard to make murder worse because it's already murder, yeah. But murdering somebody for stealing your apples when you've also been accused twice of stealing stuff.
You know, I got so caught up in the story, I didn't even think about like the fucking pure hypocrisy.
Right.
Like, how fucking dare you take an apple? So, you know, they saw Corey as this violent person with no respect for their laws or institutions, and maybe Corey was that, but if he truly had no respect for the law of 1600 Salem, he would be proven right not to have, you know, any consideration for it, as we're going to get to. It's worth noting that Giles Corey is not a hero of this story, in my opinion, but the fact that we're talking about Salem and it's our show should tell you there probably are no winners in this story.
Yeah, it was a very bad time to piss off any of your neighbors. Because,
right.
Yeah.
So before the atrocity of the Salem witch trials actually began, Salem town and Salem village were divided between the Putnam faction and the Porter faction. The Putnam family was all about traditional agricultural activities and backed the local minister, a Samuel Parris. Meanwhile, the Porter family was more industrious and forward-thinking about the town's way of life, and they also fucking hated Samuel Parris. So, you know, kind of the same shit that's always happening at any given point in America. You know,
yeah, you can't just each live your own life. It's got to be like, no, you guys are wrong, and we're gonna put it into it. Yeah.
So you know, anything you read about the the Salem witch trials will probably bring up this feud because it played a substantial role in the whole thing starting, as suddenly anybody on the wrong side of whichever faction had the most control could be brought forward as a witch. So Giles Corey, for all his faults, supported the Porter faction, and his murder fine pissed the Putnam faction off something fierce. When there was an opportunity, they would remember and bring him to, quote, justice. You know, that made-up sort of justice pulled directly from their ass, right, about made-up witchcraft pulled directly from that same ass. So Corey's second wife would die in 1684, and 6 years later, he married a woman named Martha Pennon. A widow, Martha kept Giles on the straight and narrow. They joined the church fully in 1961, and there were supposedly no more incidences of crimes or violence to report. Of course, it's also worth noting he was like 70 at this point. And
yeah, it gets hard to beat people with a stick when you're 70, right?
You know, that downward arc is really hard to do when your back's hurting.
Yeah.
Of course, John Proctor would claim that at some point during this time, Corey burnt down his goddamn house. But nothing came of those accusations, but I do want to believe it's true. Because a 70-year-old man who just hates this guy who testified against him like decades ago.
Oh, I can see it. Yeah.
That's really funny to me.
I'm 70. I don't have to take this shit 20 years ago or 40 years ago.
But then the pretrial Salem witch examinations would begin shortly after this. Martha and Giles attended these examinations, and Martha, being probably the most reasonable person at this point, quickly picked up that these witch hunts were complete bullshit. She also suspected, rightly so, that the Putnam faction would use these as an opportunity to challenge and discredit Giles. Martha hid her husband's riding saddle so he can no longer attend these pre-trials.
She didn't want him anywhere near there.
Yeah, I think her goal was to just sort of fly under the radar.
Right.
It didn't work. If anything, not showing up made people just immediately suspicious of Giles and Martha. And the Putnams fanned those flames of accusations. They used Giles' criminal history and Martha having a checkered sexual past resulting in an illegitimate son was enough to make people in Salem think, a witch!
It's like 80% of you have those same things in your past, but
right.
That's cool.
The checkered sexual past is she had sex once. Jesus Christ, these witch trials were so stupid. It's as dumb and random as that Monty Python bit from the Holy Grail, where it's we'll weigh it against a duck, you know.
That's what makes that sketch so great. Is I imagine that they were very smart comedy writers, and even though it's a British comedy and a British show, I imagine they were directly Well, England had their own witch trial shit too, so it's not something that only happened here, but it does. It encapsulates it perfectly with just inanity, but then them treating it like it's cutting edge science.
Right. So girls in the who were involved in the Putnam faction would start to mimic Martha's movements and gestures. This was kind of an interesting thing that I actually didn't know about these trials, but if you wanted somebody to, if you wanted to try to convince people that somebody was a witch, this was apparently a pretty popular tactic of just, pretending like you're being bewitched by them and under their control. Yeah. It's dumb as shit, but back then it was apparently a rock solid case. So
are you doing this willingly? No.
Yeah.
So you would never lie.
So with this evidence, an official accusation of witchcraft against Martha was declared on March 21st, 1692. And like I said, Giles Corey was no fucking hero and really was just as dumb as the rest of the town. So he actually, when they accused her, he believed the hysteria and testified against his own wife.
Cool.
He complained that his cat and ox suddenly fell ill at some point, and that he had seen Martha kneel by the fire and silently in prayer. And of course, you can only pray by a fire if you love Satan. Like,
right? She prayed. She's a witch.
You're right.
She didn't pray. She's also a witch.
It's also fire's warm, and people want to be near fire, and they also pray a lot. But yeah, it's probably the devil. So Giles was stupid, but he also, on some level, probably thought that this would get the Putnam faction off his shit. So again, not a hero, bit of an opportunist move here.
Yeah, if she's the witch I can't be, like, one of those things. Like,
well, yeah, it's like trying to be like, she must have put me under a spell. Again, this didn't work. Less than a month after his testimony against his wife, he joined her in jail, officially accused of witchcraft. Because, the Putnams didn't give a shit. This was about hurting Giles Corey. At his trial, Corey had his hands tied behind his back to prevent him from practicing witchcraft in court, which is a great.
So he could do it in jail all he wanted, just not in court.
Right. Yeah, like they said, like there's in my sources, I didn't bring the quotes here, but like because a lot of it's bullshit. A lot of it's written all the trial stuff for Giles Corey is written by that pastor for the Putnam faction,
him. Right.
But a lot of the real story has kind of worked through that. But the judge is like, it's one thing to do witchcraft out there, but you would bring it in here under the authority of law. And it's like, especially if I had access to black magic, I would totally bring it into a courtroom to get me out of a jam. You're out of your fucking mind. Anyway, so like I said, as it was for Martha, the Putnams in the audience, and to their acting credit, had been training to mimic Corey's movements and little mannerisms and just basic, old age discomforts to further the idea they're being controlled by him. And like they did a convincing enough job. And when they tried to untie his hands at some point, again, the actors in the crowd were, quote, overcome by black magic.
I love the idea that he's so powerful he can control all these people in the audience, but he would not choose to control the judge who could let him go.
Right. That's what I mean. If I had access to this shit, I would just do like the little fucking Jedi mind trick and walk out. That's the thing. Like, you have to sell your soul to the devil, and he gives you like the worst fucking magic ever. Is like, I'll give you the power to kill an ox slowly through natural disease.
I'll make it so random people around you mimic you. People like that, right?
Right. So quickly during the course of his questioning, Corey began to realize what was actually happening with these witch trials, and that he was basically a gigantic douche who had fucked over his wife and himself through his participation up to this point. So at some point, he just stopped answering questions beyond maintaining his innocence of any wrongdoing. He wouldn't reference his previous testimony, anything about witchcraft. He just would not acknowledge it.
It's got to be, like, again, like you pointed out multiple times, he's not a good guy, but that's got to be a shitty feeling when you realize, like, especially if he was that dumb where he thought this was legitimate until he found himself in the hot seat and realized, oh shit, there's nothing to this, but there's no way to argue against it. When everything you say, they're just going to say, see, that's proof. Like,
right. And I'm sure a lot of people kind of ended up in that. Like, that was the fucked up thing about the witch trials was it just, for everyone shouting and accusing, they could very well be the next one in the hot seat. Based off of who hated you at the time. So again, 16...
as I said, given our look into this time period and others throughout history and current, everybody hates everybody always. So eventually,
eventually it comes back around. So again, 1600s justice at work. By not talking during for his own trial, it technically dragged it out so long it never came to an official end. But again, because it's 1600s justice, that not an official end wasn't necessary for it to end. So after months, a full trial was prepared for Corey and Martha in September. A dozen witnesses were prepared to testify, and Corey knew he was screwed, regardless of what he did, so he decided to remain silent. This is actually, like I said, Corey's not a hero in my book, but what he does from here is kind of brilliant if you know you're pretty much fucked either way, but you have a goal in mind. So at this point, his only concern was his land, which he wanted to leave to his two son-in-laws, which required a pretty fucked up sacrifice on his part. Because if you stood trial and lost, which would be the case if he went through with the trial, the state would seize his shit. Right. But if he refused to stand trial and stood mute, the penalty for that was torture. And if you died during torture, then you weren't technically found guilty of anything, and the state couldn't take your shit under their bullshit made-up-as-they-go laws.
Which kind of leads to what you're in essence saying is, if you're really innocent, no matter how much we torture you, you won't confess, you'll just die. And it's right. And then your death proves you were innocent. It's like a great system.
It doesn't prove you're innocent, but it means we can't finish the trial because we fucked up. So the judge ordered the it's French, so watch me fuck this up. Peine forte deux, to the Silent Giles, which I made a note is a great band name. Somebody wants to say Silent Giles. That's pretty awesome. And what that means is a strong and harsh punishment, but it's actually a very specific torture. This torture involves stripping Corey naked and laying a board on top of him while he laid on the ground. Slowly, they would add more and more stone weights to the board. It took 3 fucking days of adding rocks, as Corey pleaded that it was useless to expect him to yield on his plan and stand trial, and that they might as well finish crushing him quickly. It said that, or supposedly he said, more weight. And then I'm just adding, this is a very bad way to die.
What's the point of stripping them naked?
And I feel like any torture needs to strip them naked.
Yeah, fuck these clothes. Just get them out of here. It's because the person that invented that torture had some fetish about it.
Yeah. So like I said, Corey was not a hero. To recap, in his younger days, he was a murderer. He threw his wife under the bus. It's worth noting Martha would be hung shortly after his own death due to just complete bullshit superstition. But it's worth noting his refusal to give in, even in the face of this unbearably painful death, would be a turning point in the witch trials. For his personal motives, it successfully got the sons-in-law the land he wanted to leave them. But his death also got Salem to doubt the whole nature of the witch hunt, and made those accused as well as those who would defend them reclaim some sort of courage that had been lost in the current panic and fear of everything going on. Fucked up footnote to a fucked up story here. Giles Corey's, I quote, lifelong nemesis, John Proctor, was also killed during the witch trials, further proving that this was a paranoia exploited more on a political and social level more than any actual attempt to stop evil.
See, that was the problem. We've been kind of joking, not really joking, but saying, oh yeah, you couldn't piss. It wasn't even necessarily about pissing somebody off. If you were just in their way, you held a position in the community that somebody else wanted, right? That was a way to get it. And, there are all sorts of shit like that. Or I want their land, like you were talking about here. Yeah, it just...
So, present day Salem, because if anything, the Salem witch trials, every story seems to end with a ghost side of it. But people think Corey's spirit is not at rest, and that his white ghost appears in the Howard Street Cemetery just before something bad is about to happen.
Because there's a ghost.
Yeah, I would say the ghost is the bad thing.
Right.
But if it would be great if like you saw a ghost and then just like, hey, you want a candy bar?
I was thinking lottery, but so I guess our goals are different.
No, I said good. I didn't say excellent. Don't be greedy. But usually, like it's been sometimes it's big things. People swear they saw it, and then like a giant fire would start. Like there's a famous Salem fire that happened in the early 1900s. But usually, it seems to just be a sheriff dying of a blood disorder or some natural like heart related ailment. But people are convinced that it's a sort of revenge from the afterlife, seeing as how it was the sheriff who executed that torture on Corey centuries ago.
Yeah, which I could see as a ghost being pissed at the person that actually did the execution, but I think I'd also be seeking like revenge on judges and fellow farmers and priests.
Nope, just
like
sheriffs.
There was a whole lucky them.
The curse. This curse was said to be broken when the sheriff's office moved to Middleton instead of Salem in '91. So I guess an all fucking powerful curse ghost needs to find directions to Middleton. Like, I love
because
the
it's
rules.
Middletown and not Middle Village.
Right. I just love the rules for ghost shit.
Ghosts,
It's like, hey, the only way to get them to leave you alone is to fix them a peanut butter sandwich and never come into their room again. Like, so yeah.
It's an all-powerful beyond the grave curse that can't travel.
Right. So yeah, that's Giles Corey.
Giles is such a cool name, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like also you kind of have to, you're setting your kid up to be a violent person. You name him Giles. Like, it's a cool name, but it's an action hero name.
Yeah, I was going to say, in fairness, we keep saying, oh, he wasn't a good person. He murdered a person, but it was early 1600s, mid 1600s.
Yeah, but it was about an apple. I mean,
yeah, but who didn't murder somebody in the 1600s? I think that was just like
I think everyone in Salem. I think that's why they were upset about it.
Yeah. Well, that's what's funny. If it had happened out in like out west, you'd be like, "Oh, did you murder this boy?" Be like, "Yeah, he touched an apple," and they'd be like, "Okay, that's justified." Like a lot of areas are back. Well, not back then because Old West was some 200 years later, but a lot of points in history. There's a lot of people that murder people for stupid reasons, and then the law comes in and they're like, "Yep, we would have murdered them too. Good job."
Right. Yeah.
The throwing the wife under the bus, that's a hell of a one too.
Yeah, it is, especially the way they depict it is like Martha's was a real like, come on, you're gonna go to church and that type of shit, like trying to straighten this dude out. And maybe it was just like, I don't want to fucking go to church.
I like to imagine, like, as he was testifying against her, then they were dragging her away to jail, he whispered in her ear, "I told you I fucking wanted meatloaf last night." Like, it's all over something really
random.
petty. Yeah.
To me, it would be as petty as, like, I've wanted to sleep in so many times on a Sunday, and you don't fucking... I'm a farmer. I have to get up early all the goddamn time.
You corrected me in front of Jim, and that's just not... Whatever. Yeah. It is a very interesting time period because it does give a really important look into like a lot of like things about mob mentality and just human nature.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, but it's a very gross period of time too. Yeah.
It's weird to reading, on my sources, like reading the reactions of people who are watching Corey's death, and like how some people were like amused by it, even though it's like it's a really disturbing image, and then like other people are just naturally horrified.
Well, that's and I mean, and that even shows the hypocrisy of a lot of people that consider themselves Christian, is that they're like, oh, your ultimate sin is not being Christian but worshiping the devil, so we're going to murder you and enjoy it. It's like, wait a minute.
Like there is like a brutal bloodlust at work there. And like
that they were completely willing to ignore and pretend to still be pious themselves.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of them like considered doing these works to make them more pious. Like,
right. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, like I said, it wasn't usually in any of these incidences, you will find like people in power kind of pulling the strings and telling and sort of directing where the hysteria goes. And that was definitely the case here. But the fact that there was this sort of hysteria and craze that was so violent and so like just and randomly violent is what makes this such a fucking bizarre, fascinating, terrible time.
Yeah.
So be glad you don't live then, huh?
Yeah, fortunately that stuff never happens today.
You dumbasses in 1600s. Where's your iPhones?
And yet we still swear that jury by peer is the best.
Yeah. My part is done. I will leave you to do your part. I just leave the show.
Probably work.
I'll put this like by my crazy crab bobblehead and just tap it into the mic every now and then just to.
The weird part is you'll go back to edit it and there'll be a second voice on the.
Oh God, that would be terrifying.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so my story this week does not have anything to do with witches or paranormal, but I think you'll like it. William Caldera was a chauffeur who, at some point in 1933, found himself waiting around for a Leon Bocares and a Anson Styles Blake to return from their hunting expedition near Drake's Bay in California. Presumably bored out of his mind, like I would be if I was fucking waiting around for some rich person to come back and make me drive him somewhere. William was loitering around the vehicle when he noticed something unusual on the ground. It was a brass plate that looked to be fairly old, and upon it was an inscription. It said, "Be it known unto all men by these presents, June 17th, 1579, by the grace of God and in the name of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of England and her successors forever, I take possession of this kingdom whose king and people freely resign their right and title in the whole land unto Her Majesty's keeping. Now named by me to be and to be known as, to all men as, Nova Albion. Signed G. Francis Drake." Which, they talked like idiots back then.
Yeah, that's way too many words in the wrong spots. Come on, guys.
B, I love it's common. Yeah, everybody, we know who Francis Drake was. Famous explorer.
Famous wrestler.
And great grandfather to Nathan Drake. Without Francis Drake, there'd be no Uncharted video game series, which would maybe be bad. I don't know. I like one or two of those games. Anyway, I like the line in there that I take possession of this kingdom whose king and people freely resign their right and title basically to the. So what this plaque is doing is it's claiming that land for the Queen of England, but it likes to imply that like these people are willingly like, oh, thank God the British have found us. We're under your rule now. Like, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Expansionism was a wonderful time in human history as well. Anyway, historical records do show that Sir Francis Drake did land somewhere in the area. Drake's Bay, that's present day San Francisco Bay. And he did land there in 1579, where a small fort was constructed so that he and his crew could carry out repairs to his ship, the Golden Hind, which is one of my favorite ship names like ever. Just because it sounds so stupid. Like it's such an important, famous ship, and then it's like, yes, my ship, the Golden Hind. Although I did some digging, I'm like, what the fuck is a hind?
It's an attack helicopter.
Yes,
Soviets.
It's in this context, it's a female deer.
Damn,
but
I was close.
I found out that when he left on this expedition, his ship was called the Pelican, and basically halfway through he decided to rename it, which, as dumb as this name sounds to me, but I love it. I'm so glad that his famous ship is not the Pelican, because there's nothing cool about that.
He saw his favorite movie and renamed it the Black Pearl.
Anyway, so he did land in this area in 1579, We know that. And thanks to a detailed account from a sailor, Francis Petty, who was also aboard the expedition, we know that he did actually leave behind a dated and inscribed brass plate to mark the occasion and the location and all that stuff. But until that day, when that chauffeur was just bored sitting around waiting for some people to come back from hunting, the exact location of his landing was unknown, and the plate that he had left behind had never been seen again. You know, once they went back to sea, it was just kind of lost to history. William, the chauffeur, to him, it was just a dirt-covered plate, and it was little more than a curiosity. But upon the
put bread on this plate,
hell no. But when his employer returned, he showed the plate to him. Leon, his boss, was actually a member of the Historical Society. So it says after that they just stowed it in the trunk, and they said that they'd check it out more later. Like, it was covered in dirt and stuff, and I made it sound like they probably couldn't read the inscription real well. Then William forgot all about it until a few weeks later, while he was cleaning out the car while taking a ferry to San Rafael. Apparently then he decided that the dirty metal object was just trash. And so upon arriving in San Rafael, he just threw it out the car window along the side of the road. So he wasn't real impressed. He's like, fucking words on metal.
You know, that's how I critique things. I don't just make my judgment. I declare that this is garbage and I throw it away before anyone else can think about it.
I like to think that he recognized the historical significance, but he's like me. He's like, these people talked like idiots. I'm getting rid of this fucking thing.
I already knew that the plate was like the key to some like doomsday device. And it's like, I have to get rid of this, so I'm going to pretend it's rubbish.
And then that's the other great part is it's like, I get it. He looked at it, it's like, oh, this is just trash. And then he just like throws it out the car window. Like, so people were littering assholes back then too.
Hell yeah.
3 years later, the plate was rediscovered by a shopkeep named Burl Shin. Shin showed the plate to an acquaintance who was currently enrolled at Berkeley, and that acquaintance advised him to take the plate to a Herbert Eugene Bolton, who was a professor of history at the University of California. Aside from teaching history, Bolton also acted as the director of the Bancroft Library there at the school. And he was a member of El Clampus Vetus, which is the greatest name for any kind of club I've ever heard. They were a fraternal order dedicated to the heritage of the American West.
That just sounds like, to me, like an adoption agency where you get the baby from a claw machine.
Step right up to El Clampus.
Oh, yeah. Well, you like that one? It's 50 cents. Give it a shot.
I'll mention it later here, but the members of this group were known as clampers. So, yeah, it's whatever. But Bolton had a solid reputation as a historian, but he was also well known to have one specific dream, and that was finding the Drake plate. In fact, he'd implore all of his students throughout the years, if they ever came across the plate or heard of anybody finding the plate, he wanted them to let him know right away.
Tell him, no one but me, and then I'll kill you and take credit for it.
I probably at some point specifically said, if you find a plate, do not store it in your car for weeks and then throw it out the window. That is not what I want you to do.
Oh, man, I thought that was historical preservation 101.
So anyway, my point is Bolton was a historian who it was well known that he was obsessed with finding this plate that Drake had left behind that we knew about from the writings of his shipmate. Which is presumably why Shin's friend told him to go meet the professor. Unfortunately for the professor, the shopkeeper had a lot more curiosity and follow-up than the chauffeur. So instead of throwing it out a car window, he actually did take it to Bolton for further inspection. Bolton recognized the plate immediately. Excitedly, he contacted the university president, Robert, which I just noticed I spelled Robort, and I like that even better.
Robort.
Gordon Sproul, who was the president of the, and also the president of the California Historical Society, Alan Chickering. These names are throwing me off. Like, when I'm doing my notes, I insist on putting people's full names whenever they give us a middle name because I think it's hilarious. And then you go back to read your notes and you're like, what the fuck did I do this for? Anyway, Together with Chickering, Bolton negotiated a purchase price of $2,500, which Wikipedia notes is about $43,600 of today's, like in today's value. And they also said that they would assume all obligations in determining the plate's authenticity. So basically they were agreeing to buy it as is. They weren't going to make him prove anything. Bolton was very aware of the description of this plate, and he immediately he knew what it was, and he was determined to buy it. That makes it a hell of a find for Shin. So the jerk that threw it out the window threw a $43,600 plaque away. Shin initially agreed to the deal in principle, but before the sale could be made, he told Bolton that he'd like to take the plate home overnight to show it to his uncle. And because, they hadn't purchased it yet, you couldn't really say no. It was, his plate. So he took the plate home, but 4 days passed and they hadn't heard anything back from Shin. So in a panic, Bolton and Chickering increased the offer to $3,500, which is the equivalent of $61,000. And Shin accepted. So presumably Shin was kind of my guess is he showed him this plate and the guy got super excited and said, I'll give you a shit ton of money for it. And he was like, yeah. And he's like, wait, if he agreed to that so fast, this might be worth more than that. But he didn't turn down the second offer. So they purchased the plate and it was donated to the library, Bancroft Library, because I get it. That's what people that actually care about historical preservation.
I feel like this whole story is going to end with they find that the graving on the plate was just some dirt or whatever, and they wipe it all off, and then it just says New Coke or some shit.
McDonald's Monopoly game pieces. What?
Yeah.
But anyway, they purchased the plate and donated it to the library. Bolton made the announcement at a California Historical Society meeting in April of 1937 that one of the world's long-lost historical treasures has apparently been found.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. That's what's funny is it's a very important and interesting piece of history, but he's probably the only one in the world that thought it that important.
Yeah, it's I've been lying awake wondering what happened to the plate.
Where did it go?
Who the fuck would throw it out a window?
Out a window, yeah. Unsurprisingly, however, there were those who were not that convinced that the case was so easily closed. The plate had gone through just minimal authentication, which was done by a man whose biggest goal in life was to find that specific artifact and who had shelled out a whole bunch of money on his own to purchase it. In other words, he had every reason to just want it to be real, but that wasn't enough for some people to just be okay, we accept this as the real plate.
Haters, social media calls them.
Well, they were quick to point out that the writing on the tablet was curiously inconsistent with the English language as it was written at the time. The brass, too, appeared to be too smooth to have been hammered by hand, which it would have had to have been from, the 1500s. And also the patina, or the oxidation, the green color that brass turns, appeared to be way too uniform to have happened naturally. But
okay, counter argument. The universe is a weird place, right, and things happen.
Well, that's
the
thing.
You run away.
There was a lot of things pointed out, but at the same time, those are just as, they're not proof either. They're just
it's not a debunking, but it is
It is
a challenge to the credibility of it for sure.
Sure. But the co-purchaser and Historical Society president Chickering was quick to refute those claims. And he even published a thorough defense of the object in the same issue of California Monthly that most of the skeptics' criticisms appeared. So, it wasn't even a back and forth. They got word that the skeptics were going to be publishing something saying they don't think it's real. And in the exact same damn, issue, he was like, nope, it's real. So there was a healthy debate brewing between Bolton's side and the skeptics. But there was one group of people that had absolutely zero doubts about the plate's authenticity. And that was the pranksters who had forged the thing in the first place.
Motherfuckers.
So, I mentioned earlier that Bolton was a member of the Fraternal Preservation Society, El Campus Vetus. This is the same society who describes their organization as being dedicated to the erection of historical plaques, the protection of widows and orphans, but especially the widows, and having a grand time while accomplishing these purposes. So basically, they were California's historical equivalent of Fred Flintstone's Loyal Order of the Water Buffalo. They were just like a bunch of scholarly like fuckers that like to have a good time, and turns out they would prank each other all the time.
Who doesn't? You know?
So
what a fucking lame good time. Like, hey man, we totally faked a bronze plate. This is like,
well, it turns out that they made this specifically for Bolton to find, and the prank worked, but it worked like most pranks that people do. It went way further than they expected it to.
Yeah.
So like
a good prank would be like on the opposite side. You draw like some balls with like a smiley face on them or something. Like that's the gag. Penis. Because the guy's like gonna be so excited, like, this is Francis Drake. You're like, yeah, flip it over, dipshit.
See, that's what I like. It doesn't really get into this, and there's reasons for it that I'll get to, but I figure they probably thought that Bolton would hear about the find and get super like excited about it, but that he was such a well-qualified professor, that he would see it and immediately know it was fake, and then that would like quickly dash his hopes, and then they'd all gather around and have a good laugh at the now clinically depressed professor. Like,
we broke an old man.
Oh, he hung himself, but we got him good. But apparently they had never counted on Bolton actually announcing the discovery like to the world in such a public manner. Yeah. They also had not counted on Bolton, and worse, the president of the actual historical society, shelling out a shitload of their own money to buy the thing. So that kind of posed a problem for the pranksters, because at this point they couldn't admit to the forgery, because they knew if they like let it get out, even just like privately among the other members of this group, it would eventually come back to them, and that could make them liable for the $61,000 worth of 1930s money that they had paid. But it could also like forever ruin their reputation as academics and historians, because if you get widely linked to a fraud, a forgery, and you're a historian, that's damning for your career. If you ever find anything else in the future, everybody's going to question that. So instead, they didn't want to just leave it be either, though, because they did actually care about history, and they probably felt a little bad for Bolton. They looked for other ways to let him know that the plate was fake. For instance, fellow clamper and University of Berkeley professor V.L. Vanderhoof.
I got a great idea to prove it's fake. But get off the hook is like, hey, hang on a second, and you replaced it with a giant chocolate bar wrapped in like
then take a bite out of it and be like,
hang on, it was just chocolate all along. Sorry, buddy.
They didn't try that one. But this Vanderhoof, which I love that name, and it makes me wish he had been in like Red Dead. Like instead of the Vander Lynn gang, it should be the Vanderhoof gang.
That gang didn't last long. One robbery botched.
But anyway, this Vanderhoof quickly forged a second plate to show how easy it was to make a convincing-looking artifact using modern technology. And that didn't convince Bolton of anything. So then Edwin Grabhorn, who was a clamper with another fucking awesome name, and was also a publisher of Western history magazines, I assume, or books. It didn't really specify. But he decided to publish a letter that he'd faked that purported to be from a company called Consolidated Brass and Novelty Company, which listed for sale a collection of brass plates that promised to make your hometown famous. So I guess the idea was to be like, look, this must have come from this company that is advertising these fake plates with the sole purpose of, whatever.
Yeah.
But that also did not convince Bolton.
See, at this point, it's like, okay, Bolton's not going to be convinced. We fucked his life up, but we still need to have a future here. So we need to throw Bolton under the bus. He faked it,
Yeah, he faked it and throw him out of the society. And then
who wanted it to be real more than anything? Bolton.
Bolton, right. So the last thing that this ECV for short, tried is they published a small run of a book titled Ye Preposterous Book of Brass, which detailed the problems with the plate's metal composition, the phrasing, the spelling. The book even stated that if you flipped the plate over and used an ultraviolet lamp, you would find the initials ECV hidden in fluorescent ink. And then went on to say that that proves that the plate is theirs and should be returned to this ancient order. So it was kind of like a funny book, but it was also like, it's like, oh, ha ha, here's this funny book, but here's all these things that are true. And it never fucking says if there's the initials written on the back in fluorescent ink, but I fucking hope to God that there was, because that'd be hilarious. Yeah. But that also didn't convince Bolton. Of course, pretty much everybody else was starting to express their doubts, which included Sproul, who again was the president of the university that Bolton worked at.
Yeah.
So Bolton and Chickering decided to send the plate to one Colin Fink, who was the chair of the Division of Electrochemistry at Columbia University, and asked him to perform some tests on the metal itself, which was a good idea because Fink was not like a friend of this electrochemistry would have been a fairly new discipline at the time. And Columbia University, it has nothing to do with any of these California universities that all have members like tied to the same historical society and maybe have overlapping whatever. So they're like, we're going to send this off to have, third party tests. Because this is the non-essential podcast, there's only one way that these tests could have ended. And that is, of course, with Fink and his associate, E.P. Pulshkin, declaring that the plate is definitely authentic.
Good fucking Lord.
Right. And so with that bit of third-party confirmation, most people were happy to accept the forgery for the real deal. Copies of the plates were sold as souvenirs. Photos of the plates appeared in history books. The Queen of England was even awarded commemorative copies of the plate on multiple occasions for some reason.
Well, that's good. She should have some trash in her home.
I like to think, though, that, again, like, this was and it is a cool discovery if it were real, but it's just that. It's a cool discovery, but to this person, like, these couple people, it's like the greatest thing to ever have been found.
I'm gonna disagree with you a bit. I think the only thing interesting about this is that it's fake.
Faked.
you started the story, and I was like, yeah, this better fucking
be going somewhere.
Take a turn, because fuck this plate, this poorly written plate.
But I like to think that even at a time when the world basically had come to an agreement that the plate was real, and then they were like, here's a copy of it, Your Majesty. And I like to think she's like, why the fuck would I want this? And like, here's another one. And she's like, God damn it. Stop sending me these.
Why? You should all be raising an eyebrow at how easy these are to make.
So for the next 30 some years, the plate was celebrated and recognized as the Francis Drake plate. It wasn't until the 1970s, when the plate was retested using modern equipment at Berkeley, that the plate was definitively proven a hoax. Of course, the metal composition, as pointed out in the damn book by the people that faked it, was wrong. There was too much nickel in it to be, brass from the 1500s. The analysis of the corrosion, or more importantly, the lack thereof, showed that it wasn't nearly as old as it was supposed to be. In fact, basically everything came back and proved that it was made sometime in the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, which, with science's wonderful margin of error, that puts it right in the 1930s or so when it was found. However, the prank part of it wasn't actually fully put together until 2003, when a team of historians and researchers were able to kind of go back and piece together what exactly happened. Because these assholes at the, I already forgot what it's called, but the clampers never actually came forward because they knew they fucking couldn't. So they were just like,
totally.
They're like, well, damn it.
Just hope to ride this out and be gone when everybody finds out it's fake.
That's the thing. So like I said, in the 70s, it was proven fake. And then in 2003, it was really pieced together why it happened, that it was
we were having a good time.
Yeah. Classic clamper humor.
Like, I'm probably more on their side than anyone in this story, and I still don't know how this was a good time.
Yeah. It turns out it was not a good time for them. I imagine they were all like shitting themselves. Like, man, we feel bad and we're screwing up history, but if we come clean, we're screwing up our lives, and that's not going to fucking happen. So what do we do? Oh, whatever.
But to be fair, even if I feel like at a certain point, they could have come out and said, like, we faked this, and Bolton still would have been like, no, you didn't.
Yeah, that's...
And then they would give it to other people, and they'd be like, no, you didn't. And then you're ruined anyway, and people still believe it's fucking real.
That's the thing is, and it shows just how... Something cutting edge, we always hear cutting edge science and it comes back, we're like, oh man, that's awesome. This new technology proved this. Sometimes new technology sucks and we just don't know it yet because it's new technology. Like for them to come back, you'd think, oh, they're doing this chemical analysis on the metal and this will tell us for sure. And they're like, yep, it's authentic. Like, no, it's not. Like I fucking made it in my garage. My mom watched. But anyway, Bolton died in 1953, so he went to the grave thinking he'd accomplished his lifelong goal of finding Drake's plate. As it wasn't until 20 years after he died that it was definitively, shot back down. But I don't know if that makes me feel like better or worse. Like,
I really wanted that to be taken from him because I'm such a bad person. But I don't like people like being wrong and proud about shit that is like not true.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing that this story, that's really the end of the story. I don't really have much more, but I did make a note of like it's a good example of the people's like astounding ability to start ignoring all facts and reasons in the face of something that they like just desperately want to be true. Like this person was a very like decorated and respected historian who knew his shit, but because he so wanted to find the plate and it vaguely matched what the plate like should be, it was more than vaguely, but I mean the wording was way the hell out. Anybody that's familiar with English at the time, they look at that and they say this isn't right. Yeah. But he was not willing. He just wanted it to be the plate. So to him, it was going to be the plate, no matter what.
Like I joke about, like, oh, I didn't want him to have that moment, but really, it's like think about how much like he lost of his life believing that it was really the plate, and it's like maybe you never find the fucking plate, but like what you could have been doing. Could have been genuine.
It makes you wonder if anybody ever found a plate and they're like, this has to be fake. We already found a plate, and they threw it into the ocean.
Yeah. We said this looks like shit. Threw it away.
I imagine that the plate does not exist anymore. It was real and it was very, it's well documented that it was real. But as soon as this asshole from Britain left, the Native Americans were probably like, hey, here's some fucking metal we can use to make something.
Nope, I'm going to go again, the opposite direction, way too hard, and say that Francis Drake never existed. There was no plate, there was no explorers. Life didn't start until about 10 years ago.
That's true. I've never seen Francis Drake. I'm 36 years old. Never once have I.
We got a wide open Discord room right here. He never comes on to do the show, so why the fuck would I believe that piece of shit exists? I'm not a simpleton. I ain't no sheep.
Although I did explore his ship in Uncharted. I think it was the beginning of 4.
I don't know.
Might have been 3. I don't know. One of them.
There is no Uncharted. PlayStation doesn't exist.
There was something with a ship that fell apart and you had to get out because that's a staple of that game. There's got to be 8 different big vehicles that are falling off a cliff that you have to navigate out of.
It wasn't the beginning of 4. You go onto a ship and it lights on fire in 4, but that's like at the end, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't fucking remember. There's so many goddamn names to remember in those games. It's like,
yep. And like I said, that particular set piece that I'm thinking of, and it might not even exist. I might be wrong. But it's used over and over and over in both that and Tomb Raider. So yeah, it all blurs together.
And then at the end, our heroes never learn anything because if they did, they wouldn't get in these situations where they have to climb out of some old fucking wreckage that's probably on fire,
perched dangerously on the edge of a cliff.
Right.
But, which is probably where Drake's plate is. It's
on a cliff somewhere.
Yeah, crashed airplane on the edge of a cliff for some reason.
Yeah. Well, that's why go to our Patreon and start giving us money to fund our documentary series where the non-essential podcast will try to find Drake's plate.
You know what would be funny is we'd get the money and we go out to like the San Francisco area and we'd be like, we're going to start at this beat. You look down and be like, oh, there it is.
Oh man, how cool would that be? Like this guy, like guys lived and died looking for this, and then like we just find it in like 5 minutes of looking. Like, oh, found it
with no like research or anything whatsoever. We just pick a random beach and we're like, yeah, right here. Yeah. I knew it.
I don't know. I saw a crab by it, and that looked kind of cool. And then I looked a little over to the left, and I'm like, hey,
I wonder what's under this brass plate. Wait a minute.
So yeah, the stretch goal to fund that documentary is probably about $5 because we'll just find it right away. But we will need a snack. So.
So anyway, that's what I got this week. I just thought it was fun. I like historical like shenanigans gone completely wrong. And but that's what I mean. Like, I don't know. This guy died thinking at least he didn't, like, on his deathbed, they came back and been like, oh, the prognosis is that plate is faked. And he's like, fuck. Beep. Like.
Yeah, but that would have been, isn't there just an evil part of you just, like, wants to be like, yeah, you dumbass.
I would have liked to see if he would have, like, clawed his way out of the, like, hospital bed and found any of the surviving members of this group and just beaten them with his, like, IV pole.
Except he's like crawling and weak, and they're just kind of like, "Get off me!" Look,
we fucking told you. What do you want from us? We literally said it's fake.
We gave you a good time, all right? A good, all the way till the end of your life time. Yeah. I like I said, I just kind of he wanted it to be true so badly that I can't help but be kind of annoyed with him.
Yeah, I think an angel itself could have descended from heaven and said, hey, God sent me with this message. That plate is fake. And he'd be like, nope.
Who's the historian here? Me or God?
What does he know?
But yeah, the sound of that thing dropping, whatever it was.
My wedding ring. I'm single now. I think that's
it's
how
that
it works.
easy.
Like, yeah.
I'd love it. I wonder how many divorces would happen if you had to chop off your wedding ring finger to like go forward with it. Yeah. That would be my criteria. That would be my society. Salem Village Society.
I feel like if you really want, unless, I'd allow mitigating circumstances. Like if you're being abused or something, then you have to chop the other person's fingers off. But
yeah, I just throw down a knife in front of you and say, do it. And if you can do it, then you're clear.
You win.
Like you either you have to take off your ring finger, or you have to take off their entire hand.
Right.
And that's I have good ideas.
Vote for Ben 2020.
Pneumatic tubes and bloodshed for every failed marriage.
Well, that's how you get the knives to people. You send them through pneumatic tubes because nothing could go wrong there.
I'm just imagining like you have to actually shove your hand into the pneumatic tube, and the tube will go so fast it just lops it off. All right, we can't go down that rabbit hole again. That's the end of the show. We'll be back next week. Goodbye.
Later.